I'm the staff leader with the landscape and planning here with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service located here in Temple, Texas. And today you've been invited to discuss the planning study for the rehabilitation of floodwater retarding structure BigSandy number 26 there in Wise County. Just briefly, NRCS through the Flood Control Act built thousands of dams across the state of Texas back primarily in the 50s and 60s. And back in the 2000s, the rehabilitation program was kicked off to help address some of these aging structures. And so the rehab program allows NRCS to go back and assist the sponsors of these watershed structures to look at updates because of change of conditions. Primarily, these structures were originally low hazard dams, and due to changes, they are now classified as high hazard dams. And so that eligibility puts them into the rehab program. And BigSandy26 is one that we are currently doing. This is the first public meeting to kick off this planning study to look at updates to this structure. So without going into any more detail, JR will cover kind of the ins and outs of what we're planning on doing and the time frame. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thanks a lot, Mark. My name is jcollins with Schnabel Engineering. We're serving as the team's technical contractor, working for the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board and NRCS to complete this planning study to review rehabilitation options for BigSandy flood retarding structure number 26. So the project team in attendance, we do have representatives from the Texas State Board, Wise Soil and Water Conservation District, Wise County Control and Improvement District number 1, and Wise County Commissioners Court. These are a few of the sponsoring local organizations and the ones who are most involved with BigSandy26 in particular. Again, my name is J.R. Collins. I'm serving as the project manager for Schnabel. With us also is Jeremy Young, who's a principal and senior reviewer involved in the project and our Austin office branch leader. We also have, we're joined by Sal DeCarli from EA, who is our environmental subconsultant, who's going to be investigating a lot of the environmental impacts associated with potential alternatives. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those specifics later. And of course, Mark helped kick us off, Mark Northcutt, who's representing the NRCS today. So the agenda, simply stated, we're going to take a quick look at the history of the project and the dam and identify some of the objectives for this study, purpose and need for the project. We're going to discuss in a little more detail the Federal Watershed Rehabilitation Program and some of the steps that are required and why the sponsoring local organizations are pursuing this. And we're also going to open up for identifying scoping concerns, and that's really the reason we've invited everybody here today is to solicit feedback from regulatory agencies and the public to identify if there are any known concerns or other concerns that should be investigated during this planning environmental study. So a brief history of the project. It's located in Wise County, Texas, very close to Alvord, just northeast of Alvord downtown. Structure number 26 was added to the supplemental work plan in 1979. The dam was constructed in 1984 under some of the flood prevention acts that Mark mentioned before. It's currently maintained by Wise County Water Control Improvement District 1 and the other SLOs that I mentioned. Some of the key information regarding the dam: it's about 34 foot tall, has a drainage area around 435 acres, and it's currently classified as high hazard. So this is a case, just like Mark alluded to in the introduction, where the structure was originally designed as a low hazard structure, and due to additional analyses, dam breach, inundation, and hazards downstream, it has since been reclassified as high hazard and therefore does not meet the requirements for high hazard dams. This is a look at an excerpt from Friesen-Nichols Dam Breach Inundation Analysis Report, and you can see the limits of the theoretical breach downstream, the structure, and the reservoir up here. And these limits represent where the theoretical breach would inundate. And so based on the number of hazards and expected loss of life downstream that are impacted by a potential failure, that's how the high hazard is determined. Looking at a brief timeline, as we mentioned, site number 26 was added to the Supplemental Watershed Plan in late 1970s, and the dam and spillway were constructed in 1984. Fast forwarding a little bit, Friesen-Nichols performed a dam assessment report and dam breach inundation analysis report in 2011, which again confirmed the high hazard classification. And at that time, some initial alternatives analyses were performed, and the recommendation for submitting this project into the National Watershed Rehabilitation Program was also made. And here we are in 2020. The project was accepted as a candidate to be funded partially by federal government. And as part of that, this is where this supplemental watershed planning study commences, and it's one of the prerequisites to acquiring that funding assistance and technical assistance provided by NRCS. And as part of that planning study, it brings us to today, which is this meeting where we present the project. It's very much a kickoff in a sense, where we show you what we're planning to do and ask for feedback and, as I said, other known concerns about the project. So the identified purpose and need of the structure is flood mitigation. Currently, according to the watershed plan, there are no other formal or official purposes of the structure. So it's there for reducing the flooding downstream during storm events. The existing spillways consist of a reinforced concrete riser structure. Has a 24-inch diameter pre-stressed cylinder pipe with anti-seep collars and a vegetated earthen spillway located in the left abutment. And we'll show a little slide here in a moment to just talk about some of the nomenclature with dams, just so we're all looking at the same thing. The Friesen-Nichols report in 2011 found that the dam and spillway system is not currently capable of safely storing and discharging runoff associated with state-required design storms designated by TCEQ or the NRCS Principal Spillway Hydrograph, Spillway Design Hydrograph, or Freeboard Hydrographs. This is just a schematic from a FEMA pocket guide showing some of the key features of an earthen dam. So we can see at the top principal spillway or riser structure. Here's an emergency spillway. The reservoirs or lake is what we have on the upstream side, what we would say, and on the downstream is the receiving channel, water moving away from the dam. This face would be called the downstream slope, and we might have internal drain systems like a toe drain and energy dissipation structures to prevent scour and erosion at the toe of the dam. And where the dam intersects natural ground, we refer to that as an abutment. And the top of the dam, the flat portion running across, is known as the crest. When we talk about dams, we usually refer to things as one stands on top of the dam facing downstream. So if we refer to something as left, it would mean as I'm facing downstream to the channel. So this emergency spillway is located in the left abutment of the dam. And again, we see another schematic of a principal spillway and riser pipe similar to BigSandy26. So a few photographs just to contextualize. This is just looking at the upstream slope and the bench access road running along the upstream slope. There's some riprap wave protection that was recently upgraded, and the upstream slope of the embankment shown here in the reservoir. This is a photograph of the reinforced concrete riser structure. It's a D by 3D riser designed by the SCS or NRCS in the 80s. This is a look from the crest facing downstream. The area around the trees, down below the trees, is where the principal spillway conduit outlets and discharges into the receiving waters. And right in front of us would be called the downstream slope. This is a look at the receiving waters and looking at the outlet of the principal spillway conduit. You can see there's a reinforced concrete cradle and the 24-inch diameter cylinder pipe we mentioned earlier. And here's a look off to the left. We'll show a plan view in a moment that will help tie this together a little better, but this is the auxiliary spillway channel located in the left abutment of the dam. So the dam is not exempt from TCEQ rules requirements or federal requirements, and as we mentioned, it does not currently meet the requirements that are designated for high hazard dams. Therefore, a spillway upgrade is required to rehabilitate the subject dam. I should probably clarify there that there are other ways to achieve compliance with those standards. You could potentially raise the dam or lower the normal pool or things like that. Part of this is we haven't gotten into the alternatives just yet. That's going to be the next step following this meeting once we know what all the concerns are and the limits of study are identified. But in general, the idea is the dam and spillway don't currently meet the requirements, so we're going to need to either upgrade storage and or spillway capacity to make that a true statement. The supplemental watershed planning study is prerequisite to receiving the federal funding for the design and construction of the rehabilitation alternative. And the planning study will compare economic advantages and impacts of the different alternatives, identify concerns, resource issues, and also identify ways to reduce impacts to the environment. So environmental considerations, social considerations, and economic considerations, these are all going to be part of the planning study and what's going to be happening over the next several months as we develop these alternatives. So the Watershed Rehabilitation Program provides opportunities for cost sharing between the federal government. The typical cost sharing ratio could be described as about 65% of the total design and construction costs being paid by the federal government, with the remaining 35% of the costs being covered by the sponsoring local organizations, not to exceed 100% of the total project cost. And also, if there were items that did not meet the purpose and need, or they were considered additional, then those would also be the responsibility to be paid by the SLOs or sponsoring local organizations. So part of this planning study is to promote public participation, and we want to make sure that the public and the stakeholders and regulatory authorities are aware of the project and the planning effort. And it also requires a series of public meetings, including this one, to identify scoping topics, identify project opportunities and resource concerns, and also other areas of concern that the team should consider. A brief history of the Watershed Program through a series dating back all the way to the 1930s, enacting the Soil Conservation Act. Several public laws have been enacted that authorize the SCS to begin working on watershed projects, and through additional laws and acts that were passed, the law and the authority was extended such that the SCS had permanent planning authority and also the ability to support sponsoring local organizations with technical and financial assistance. So almost 12,000 flood control structures have been constructed in the U.S. under this program since the late 1940s. The projects provide an immense amount of annual benefit, reducing flood risk downstream, reducing erosion, providing recreational facilities, water supplies, and protecting vital wildlife habitats. So some of the types of projects that would be considered eligible for federal assistance involve flood mitigation, watershed protection, water supply, water quality management, agriculture, fish and wildlife, and public recreation, to name a few. And of course, watershed structure rehabilitation, which is the primary focus of this project. This map just shows several of the structures that were constructed under various public law across the U.S. by NRCS. So it just shows a scatter plot of all the NRCS watershed structures across the U.S. And there are 393 projects that are high hazard in Texas, and about 280 of those need to be upgraded to meet high hazard criteria. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the future, and the state's planning for these projects to take place here. And it's just another look at some of the locations of the watershed projects across the state. Some notable dam failures took place in the 1970s. A lot of problems. I think people familiar with Teton, designed by U.S. Bureau of Rec, and this unfortunately failed during first filling. Laurel Run Dam in Pennsylvania, again, 1970s. These failures occurred before there were many state dam safety regulatory agencies, and so these events triggered lawmakers to sort of take a closer look at dams and dam safety. And another thing to point out, many of the structures that were designed and constructed by the NRCS during prior to the dam safety era, let's call it, you see a huge amount of dams were constructed in this time period. And so following the 1970s, 1978 Kelly Barnes Dam failure in Georgia, we can see that regulations have changed. The construction of dams has gone down quite a bit. Many fewer dams have been constructed since that time, and also development downstream of the flood control structures that were built in the 50s and 60s may have caused classifications to change. So things that may have been designed as low hazard now have population at risk in the breach zone, and so those folks are at risk, and so the hazard classification changes, and therefore the requirements for these dams and spillways change. Dam failures are not just a thing of the past or a history lesson. The Dunlap Dam in New Braunfels failed about a year and a half ago. I'm not sure. Sure, people probably saw this gate failure, and also Edenville Dam in Michigan just last year. So these are still relevant, and it emphasizes the importance of inspection, dam safety, and making sure that structures are compliant with laws and regulations. They're certainly there for a reason. So there are several dam safety agencies and organizations, including USDA, NRCS, who's here today, TCEQ, which is a state regulatory authority on dams, and Army Corps, and ASDSO, and others. In Texas, dams are defined as being any barrier or barriers and appurtenant structures constructed for the purpose of permanently or temporarily impounding water. And the state regulations require that all dams 25 feet or more in height with an impoundment of 15 acre-feet or more, or all dams 6 feet or greater in height with an impoundment of 50 acre-feet or more are considered regulated. And just to, in case anybody's not familiar with the term acre-foot, it can be thought of as 1 acre of area with 1 foot depth of water over it, which is pretty close to about the size of a football field. So if you picture a football field with a 1 foot swimming pool over it, that would be about 1 acre-foot. So there are 3 different hazard classifications in Texas, and also through the NRCS, that range from low hazard to high hazard, and these are determined based on, again, the breach inundation results and the amount of damage or loss of life that's anticipated in the event of a catastrophic failure of the structure. The design storms required for high hazard dams across the country and in Texas, of course, but are typically fractions of the probable maximum precipitation, or PMP, And so just to kind of give a sense of what that means, this graph shows a comparison between a 100-year storm event, 24-hour duration, and a probable maximum precipitation storm event, 24-hour duration. You can see you have almost 10 inches in the 100-year event, but you have almost 36 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period as the PMP. So this is a very intense storm. It's not to say that these don't happen. Fractions of the PMP happen. Real storm events happen that mimic this amount of rainfall over this duration, and so there is a high standard for high hazard dams. And this is again to protect the public downstream and to promote public safety. So this is a map of the state, just showing some of the different watersheds throughout the state. The Big Sandy Creek watershed is part of the Trinity River drainage basin, and the entire Big Sandy Creek watershed consists of about almost 500 square miles. And if we zoom in a little bit closer, we can see the approximate location. We're in the upper reaches of the Trinity River water drainage basin. So here is an aerial photograph looking at recent aerial photography, just delineating the watershed. Here's the dam and reservoir located down here, the bottom left of the page, and you can see most of the watershed consists mostly of cropland or fields and pastures with a few small ponds and a little bit of forest in there. And this aerial was taken in 1981 before the dam was there, so we can see some minor differences. Obviously, the absence of the structure in the reservoir, and some of those other ponds were not formed yet. But generally, things don't look dramatically different within the watershed based on a look at these photos. So, just getting back to the supplemental watershed plan and what we're going to do in the future here. The main focal points of the analysis and study include reviewing the hydraulic capacity of the existing spillway and outlet works, reviewing the performance during design storm events, and this includes review of the integrity analysis of the earth and auxiliary spillway. We're going to review downstream areas and flooding the breach inundation zone. Upstream areas, if there's any flooding or available additional storage capacity that can be leveraged, the economic and social benefits of the project, some temporary impacts during construction, including erosion and sedimentation control issues, traffic control and detours, or temporary environmental and or social impacts caused by increased truck traffic or other items like that. The study will also include an environmental assessment, a cultural resources assessment, and a review of the sedimentation rate and the remaining useful life of the structure. So now, project timeline looking forward, here we are today in this meeting, and following this, where the project team is going to identify resource and scoping concerns, evaluate the existing structure. We're going to identify and refine alternatives that will, when constructed, fully designed and constructed by qualified contractor, will bring the dam and spillway into compliance with applicable state and federal regulations for high hazard dams. We're going to begin drafting the supplemental watershed Plan EA document. That document will be available for public and interagency review again once it's drafted. So there will be more opportunities for folks here and others to provide comment and provide feedback to the team. And then we will hold a second public meeting, likely midsummer, to present the preferred alternatives and solicit feedback once more. And by the mid to late 2021, we will be submitting the entire supplemental watershed plan to NRCS for review, and we will be soliciting that feedback on the overall Plan EA document. By Q3, plan on finalizing the document and identifying the preferred alternative or the selected alternative. And at that point, I believe if if everybody's still moving forward, then we would begin the final design of the rehabilitation. So some of the major milestones, late in the fall, early in the fall, Schnabel and the board, state board, and NRCS met to have a kickoff and initiate the study. Today, we're holding the first public meeting. Thank you all for attending again. In March, we're going to be presenting alternatives to the sponsors, and they will decide a preferred alternative. And then in the summer, we will begin incorporating comments from the National Watershed Management Review Team in NRCS, and later that summer, submit the plan to the national headquarters and finalize the plan so that we can prepare for final design. So the title of this meeting or presentation is a scoping meeting, and we're defining scope as the range of actions, alternatives, and impacts that are to be considered in the environmental assessment document. The scoping is used to identify the significant issues that need to be reviewed for detailed analysis, and also to eliminate issues that are deemed to be not significant. For instance, coral reefs probably will not be a major concern on this project, although it is identified as a typical scoping concern. So we're soliciting federal, state, and local agencies, as well as public interest groups, property owners, and other stakeholders as well. So this map shows the project team's initial study area. This is identified just making assumptions that this will encompass all the areas that will be disturbed. And as we develop our alternatives, we'll need to look back, and we may need to widen this area a little bit, or if through scoping somebody identifies a concern that may be outside of these limits, then we would augment these limits so that those areas could be included in the study. This table presents a list of the typical scoping concerns that are associated with these planning studies, and folks on the call may be familiar with this table or maybe not. We don't need to characterize everything here today. If you provide us with your concerns, then the project team will identify which of these are most closely match your concern, and it'll be documented and recorded as such. So I hope I made record time today. I guess before we open it up for comment and discussion and questions and things like that, I just wanted to again say thank you to everybody who is participating today and everybody on the team. Please feel free, if you don't feel comfortable speaking today, please feel free to follow up to me with an email at the email address shown here, or feel free to write me a letter, send me a package at the address shown below. And right now we're planning on accepting comments through January 22nd, so about 8 days from today. And once the existing site conditions evaluation is complete and the alternatives are developed, we will again have additional meetings to solicit specific feedback on those alternatives. So I guess at this point, I would like to, unless anybody else from NRCS or TSSWCB would like to speak, then I would like to kind of open the floor up for questions. You could submit them in text, or maybe we can do the hand raise function, or whatever we need to do. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you, JR. So if anybody has any question, either turn your mic on and speak, or I guess you can raise your hand, or there's certainly, as JR mentioned, this will be posted. Did you go over that, JR, where they can go to leave their comments or review this after today?
I did not yet. So everybody who is on the invitation will be sent a follow-up email and a link to a YouTube where the recording will be presented, so that you can watch it again or share with others within your organization or interested people as you see fit. So I will follow up with everybody who participated today and who accepted the invite with that info.
Good, because I did hear that there were some that were having problems, getting into the meeting and also kind of staying on the meeting. So there's probably some that kind of came in and out, and we definitely need to make sure that they get the information.
Absolutely, and just so everyone knows, this wasn't our first choice to do this digital meeting. We're sort of rolling with the punches, so to speak, and I appreciate everybody's patience and bearing with us, and I think we can make it work. I see we do have a couple hands raised. I saw Bruce Prudhomme. Would you like to unmute, sir?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. Any chance we might be able to get an ownership map of the inundation area and any of the flood zones downstream?
So I believe that will be included in the Plan EA document, certainly. Let me speak with the board and NRCS offline because, as I mentioned, a previous consultant had performed some of that, and Schnabel is also tasked with reviewing and going into a different level of detail on some of those inundation analyses. So if you could let us follow up with you on that, I'd appreciate it.
That'd be fine. It would help to see if I have any other additional issues or concerns if I could see those maps now, as opposed to waiting toward the end of the publication of the document.
Yes, sir. Let me follow up on that.
Bruce, this is Mark with NRCS. Typically, as far as landowner or ownership maps, we'll identify the landowners immediately adjacent to the structure and the upstream impoundment where some of the easements will be needed, and again, immediately around the structure. But I don't know that we necessarily go into ownership details in the breach area other than identifying those structures and facilities that would be impacted. So you want to know actually who owns that property?
Yes, actually, and then and of course, selfishly, does the Forest Service and Range have any expected direct effects or even indirect effects?
Okay, well, we can certainly talk about and see what we can do earlier than not. But yeah, those typically it's just the limits of that inundation area and the structures and facilities that are impacted.
That's what I'm asking about.
The sponsors, not really going to have any control other than what upgrades we make to the structure itself on the downstream and the landowners downstream.
Yes, that's what I'm asking about. Thank you.
I see Reese Sewell also has a hand up.
Hi, everybody. I work for the Forest Service here in Decatur. I am a district staff officer. I cover ecosystem management and planning, including range and wildlife and watershed. Thanks for inviting me. I just want to point out that it looked like about half of the watershed for this dam is on Forest Service administered land. One comment I would like to make is we are generally interested in restoring streams on the LBJ National Grasslands, and that includes making increasing stream sinuosity, that kind of stuff, using weirs and baffles and stuff like that to decrease velocity and eventually build up strata so that we we can get these incised streams back to more of a normal functioning floodplain and bank full. So to that end, we have been trying to get some stuff started on the Cottonwood Creek watershed. We have solicited a contract to do these kinds of stream improvements. And the first phase of that would be probably a LiDAR flying in a watershed analysis. So we've tentatively got that in the works. We would like to, we do have a significant control over the Cottonwood Creek watershed, and we would like to get streams back to real functioning streams with structurally and for wildlife and fisheries and recreation. So so I say that to let y'all know what we're working on in the area, and also I am interested, and I don't know where this fits in this project, but I'm interested in seeing an alternative that integrates stream restoration into the design. I do have an EA already done for the Caddo Lbj that includes stream restoration. So there might be some, we might be able to dovetail on some NEPA for that. So, but again, my comment is just I'd be interested in seeing that that alternative, some kind of integration of stream restoration included in an alternative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sewell. Okay, and Mr. Davis asked who is the SLO for the project. There are several. I think the primary sponsoring local organizations for this, probably most closely involved, are the Wise County Water Control Improvement District number 1, Wise Soil Water Conservation District, and help me out, Mark, please.
In Wise County.
Okay. I think, and there are about 8 total for the entire watershed, but I think those 3 are probably most closely tied to this particular project, site number 26.
That's correct. The overall watershed plan has several sponsors to cover the entire watershed, but specific to Big Sandy number 26, we're predominantly talking with those 3 sponsors.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments or concerns? Give it another minute or so. Okay, I see Mr. Massaro, please go ahead.
Yes, this is Doug Massaro. I'm the dams program manager for the southern region of the Forest Service, and just wanted to thank you for the information, and please do keep us posted on the progress of the project.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And thank you for your attendance today.
Just for record keeping, and like I said, I know we had some issues with people getting into the meeting or maybe staying on the meeting. I see Joe Shelnut with the Army Corps still listed as a participant. I know he is having trouble. getting off or kicking off and on, but are you still on, Joe? I guess he didn't make it back on. Okay, well, like I said, JR, we'll definitely have to reach back out to Mr. Shelnut and others with the Army Corps.
Yes, sir. We certainly will, and we'll do that very quickly here once we get the recording wrapped up and make sure everybody has an opportunity. Well, it would appear that is it for comments, unless anybody else has anything else to add here. Again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to the presentation and express your interest in the project. And as I said, we will follow up with all the invitees with information on how to view the presentation via YouTube or on demand, as well as my contact info. You can reach out to me or reach out to Mark if you have Mark's information. We can provide more information and get your comments into the record as well. So I think with that, we're going to conclude the meeting, and just want to thank everybody one last time and wish you all a good rest of the day. And thanks again. And well,